Okay, in this section we're going to talk about metabolism, and it's all the reactions in the body that break down food or make molecules. So we're going to talk about metabolism in this section. So this chapter is discussing the reactions of the body, which are overall called metabolism. Some of the reactions produce energy as they break large molecules into small ones. And so large molecules are like fatty acids and sugar and amino acids. And we break them down in the word is catabolism. And we break them down into smaller molecules such as pyruvate, carbon dioxide, and water. And so all those types are breaking down reactions, and that's called catabolism. And glycolysis and the citric acid cycle are examples of catabolism, and we'll talk about that in this chapter. Another type of set of reactions consume energy as they build larger and more complicated molecules from smaller ones, and that's anabolism. So smaller molecules such as amino acids, nucleotides, acetate are formed into proteins or nucleic acids or fatty acids. And these are reactions that are forming molecules. So we're taking small molecules and making larger molecules. So that's anabolism. So we have digestion and absorption in the GI tract. And digestion is a catabolic process because we're taking large molecules that we're taking into our mouth as food, and then we're breaking into smaller things. So at the beginning, when we take in food in the mouth, if it has carbs in it, carbohydrates, the salivary chemical called amylase will break that carbohydrate down by breaking the glycosidic bonds that we saw in sugars and starches and break it into smaller polysaccharides. So remember, starch is a really long molecule. It's a polymer. And amylase in your mouth can break it down into smaller pieces, into polysaccharides. In the stomach, we have stomach acid, and the purpose of that is to take any proteins that we've eaten and to unfold those proteins, denature them so that those amino acids are exposed, and then we can break those long chains of amino acids and proteins down. In the small intestine, the pancreas neutralizes that stomach acid by secreting bicarbonate ion. It's like if you've ever seen baking soda, that's what it's. The small intestine, the pancreas is pushing that out into the small intestine to neutralize that stomach acid. And it also secretes a digestive enzyme for the carbs. So the same, you had amylase in the mouth, and then you also have another enzyme in the small intestine. It's called pancreatic amylase, and it hydrolyzes the polysaccharides to form maltose and glucose. And then there's another enzyme that takes those two disaccharides and turn it into glucose, which is the energy molecule that we use in our body. And glucose is a one-ring sugar that we talked about before in the sugar chapter. All right, so here we're going to talk about digestion of starches, sugars, and fiber. We talked about the starch coming into the mouth, and it breaks down into oligosaccharides. Nothing happens to those oligosaccharides in the stomach, but it does get further broken down by the pancreatic amylase and other enzymes into glucose. Sucrose and lactose come in the mouth. Nothing happens to them there. Remember, they're disaccharides. nothing happens to them in the stomach, but then in the small intestine they are changed and broken down in the small intestine. And then cellulose is not affected by any part of our body. It's part of, grains and vegetables and fruits. It's not useful for energy, but it is good. It's good for our intestines to produce waste, so it does not get digested. Proteins, we were saying that the proteins come into the mouth, nothing happens in the mouth, but in the stomach, it's hydrolyzed, so those long chains of protein are broken down into smaller chains, and then when they get to the small intestine, there are enzymes that will break those smaller chains into their component amino acids. So we learned about the amino acids and proteins in an earlier chapter. Let's see. And we said that in the stomach that those proteins are like, normally they're folded up, but in the small intestine, in the stomach, those acids make those twists and turns of the proteins unwind and expose them to open them up so that enzymes can get in there and break them down and free the amino acids from them. Okay, lipids aren't affected in the mouth or the stomach. Lipids are fats, remember, fats and oils. But once they get to the small intestine, the gallbladder releases bile salts. And these bile salts, we talked about this when we talked about micelles a few chapters back. And it takes those big pieces of fat and breaks them into smaller droplets. And there's enzymes then that can, lipases, which can then break those fats and oils into free fatty acids, the glycerol and the monoacylglycerols that are the formation of fats and oils. Once those those are smaller pieces, then there's lipoproteins, which can attach to those things and transport them through the body where they're needed. Remember, lipids are nonpolar. They don't like water. So to make them able to be moved around the body, which is, almost all water, we have to attach them to some molecule that is water soluble. So these lipoproteins can make that happen. They have a polar end to them so that they can attach one end to the particle that they want, and then they have a polar end that is soluble in the blood. All right, so metabolic pathways are a series of sequential reactions. So you'll have a reaction A, call it reaction A, that will then form a product called reactant, which will form a product, say B, and then B is broken down and used in another reaction to form C. So it goes A to B to C to D, continuing on. That's a metabolic pathway. So we're going to talk about these different reactions. Some of the reactions in our body are called coupled reactions, and we'll talk about that here. So when we have some reactions need more than one reaction to happen at the same time. And so here's a very important reaction. This one is important to know because ATP is the energy holding molecule in our body. It's useful. It holds a lot of energy. It holds, this reaction, the formation of it takes 7.3 kilocalories That's a lot of energy. And when we take ATP and we go the opposite direction, where we take ATP and we go back to ADP, we get 7.3 kilocalories of energy, and it's useful in other reactions, in other coupled reactions with ATP. So ATP is a storehouse of energy in the body. That's the important thing to remember for ATP. That's the thing I need you to know the most. It holds energy, and ATP is used in many of our metabolic reactions to make other reactions happen. So it's really important. And those phosphate bonds, you see the phosphate is kind of highlighted in yellow. Those phosphate bonds have a lot of energy within them. So they're called high energy bonds. They have a lot of energy in them, and they're useful to make a lot of our reactions in our body happen. All the things that form molecules that we need in our body to do all the work that happens in our body, ATP helps with those things. We also have some other reactions in our body that store a lot of energy as well. NADH holds 52.6 kilocalories, way more than ATP, so this is useful in other reactions as well. And FAD holds 43.4 kilocalories of energy, so it's very helpful molecules to store energy that we need to make things happen in our body. So these are storehouses of energy, these molecules, ATP, NADH, and FADH2. They have lots of energy in them, and they're useful for making reactions happen in our body. So there's a lot of reactions. I'm not wanting you to know a lot of, to memorize these at all. Don't worry about that. But just know that these coenzymes and enzymes in our body hold a lot of energy. They make a lot of things happen. And if you know that the ones I just talked about, the ATP, the NADH2, the NADH, and the FADH2 hold lots of energy, that's all I need you to know about these. It's very complicated, and there's lots more to know, but I think these are the main things to know about them. So what's happening in these reactions are redox reactions and reduction and oxidation reactions. And if you know on the left side, the NADH has more hydrogens. There's that blue hydrogen right here. And then this guy. So this is when the molecule has more H's, it's reduced, and this side is more oxidized. So we're having lots of redox reactions in our body that are allowing energy to be used to make molecules that we need for our body to function. So remember, if a molecule has more H's on it, it's reduced. If it has less H's, it's oxidized. And here's another example. This one doesn't have that H there, but here it has the H. So this is the reduced form, FADH2. This is the oxidized form of that. And here's another H. So H's added to a molecule make it reduced. On the left side here is oxidized. So we have both of these types of reactions happening in the metabolism of our body. We have breaking down, and then so it's catabolism, and we're forming large molecules. That's anabolism. And these reactions need those molecules that we talked about, ATP and NADH. Both of these molecules are used in both of these processes. And sometimes we're making those molecules, and sometimes we're using those molecules as energy storehouses. For the coupled reactions, we need ATP and NADPH to make, we need those energies. So it just depends on if we're making something or if we're breaking something down. So on glycolysis, this is the many steps that break down glucose into pyruvate. So this reaction gives us ATP and gives us energy. So this is why our body needs glucose to break down. It goes through a process of changing glucose into fructose, and then it turns it into pyruvate, and we get energy, we get ATP out of this whole process. So this is happening, just so you know, I showed that picture of the cell. This is happening in the cytosol, which is the cytoplasm of the cell. It's in the liquidy part of the cell. And the overall point of glycolysis is we're taking, we took a starch, we broke it down with amylase in the mouth and the small intestine. We broke it down all the way down to a single ring of glucose, and then we take that glucose and we form pyruvate out of it. So, and you can see there's ATP involved and there's NADH involved. So they're coupled reactions where you need several different molecules to have this happen. I'm not expecting you to know this process. This is a lot. So just know that in our body, we use a process called glycolysis to take glucose, change it into pyruvate, and that's the fuel for our body. Sugars are the fuel for our body. And almost all living organisms use this pathway, and glycolysis takes carbohydrates, changes it to pyruvate, and ATP for energy storage. So ATP is holding on to that energy for us, and then it's useful for other reactions in our body. Sometimes we take, sometimes if we're doing exercise and we don't breathe, we don't have enough oxygen in our muscles, we'll do something called lactate fermentation. So sometimes you probably have felt like when you're out of breath and you're running or something like that, you're taking pyruvate that we just talked about, and it's changing it, our body's changing it into lactate to get some energy. So this reaction happens in low oxygen situations of exercise. Another reaction that can happen is pyruvate can be changed to acetylide, and this happens in yeast functions, and after it changes into acetylide, it can change into ethanol, which is the alcohol that we talk about when people are drinking alcohol in beers or wines. So yeast can do this process of taking pyruvate and changing it into ethanol. Our body can also take a lot of steps and provide, sometimes our body needs to make glucose, and so this process here is showing how glucose can be made in our body, starting with pyruvate on the bottom there and going all the way up to glucose. So sometimes our body makes its own glucose. So a couple more reactions before I stop here. I want to talk about glycogen is really important. So glycogen is a polymer of glucose stored in the muscles and the liver. And so our body stores glucose into long strings of glycogen, and it is an energy storehouse for us. So that's how we hold on to extra glucose in our body. We keep it in the muscles and we keep it in the liver. And a couple more reactions. Here's one reaction. I'm not thinking this one's so important for you guys to know. Photosynthesis is for plants forming the glucose that then we eat when we take in food from plants. So that's the reaction for photosynthesis. And then photosynthesis has two parts. It has a light reaction and a dark reaction. And water is consumed and oxygen is formed by that light reaction. And then the dark reaction takes CO2 and forms the glucose that we then take into our bodies when we eat plants and plants. We're going to talk about citric acid cycle in our next set of lectures. So I'm going to stop here and do another set of lectures because this is kind of complicated. And so let's take a break and then we'll talk about the citric acid cycle. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.